Hello, I've talked about some very big and epic sci-fi and fantasy books recently. Today we're talking about something different. Today we're discussing this book, The Hike by Drew Magary. I picked this book up randomly from the bargain shelf of a really cool bookstore in New Hampshire, actually on a hiking trip. It's about a man named Ben who's on a business trip, goes for a hike, and something horrific happens. I'm not going to tell you what. It shocked me to my core when it happened. It was completely unexpected for me. Then he goes on this Vonnegut-esque, very weird, esoteric, zany adventure. His life is constantly threatened. There's all these things that go on that are just bizarre, and he's just trying to get home to his family. I think it's sort of a metaphor for a journey of self-discovery. This book is about 250 pages. I didn't realize it would be quite as terrifying as it can be in some parts, so I picked it up as a little break between big sci-fi and fantasy books. It wasn't necessarily the break I expected, but it was lighthearted in some places. Let's start with the world building as I usually do. This one is set in our world, sort of. It is classic low fantasy. It's an altered version of our existing reality and this planet. The changes to the world are bizarre. Frankly, I could not even keep track of how many weird things happened. And I've read a lot of Vonnegut. I've even read Tom Robbins, very bizarre books. This one is in some ways more out of left field than Tom Robbins' work, which is crazy. I think because the author is such a sober writer. He's actually a journalist. He's a correspondent for a few different publications, and so that makes the prose feel a little bit journalistic. Not in a bad sense, the prose is very good, but it definitely is not as bizarre as Tom Robbins' writing style is. So you have this pretty straightforward, descriptive, good writing style with really bizarre things, and that makes the world building feel a little weird. I think it's intended to feel very weird and to feel very removed from reality and disturbing to an extent. It feels like some sort of disassociation, derealization from the real world. It's kind of like being in an extended nightmare, which is fun sometimes, and a lot of the time it's kind of brutal. So the world building feels like a nightmare. What about the plot? The plot is actually one of the better parts of the entire book. There are some very fun twists in this one, nothing that's totally unpredictable. I think you can kind of see them as they come. But they make it interesting regardless, and they don't feel like they're just there to shock you or change things. They feel like they're actually just being revealed as significant parts of the plot. That's something that bothers me about some books when they have twists, when they have big changes. It feels almost like the author just decided that would happen and then swapped it around. This one definitely feels plotted out, it feels planned, it feels like the route that you know you're gonna hike, and then you sort of step onto the path and it leads you around and you experience it for the first time anyway. I do like that the plot of this actually feels like it mirrors the meandering path that you'd find on a mountain. It's not insane, it's not the craziest plot I've ever read, but if you've read any Vonnegut, I would say this is the Vonnegut type plot, but with less thematic significance. That brings us to themes. The biggest theme in this book is that it is the journey of self-reflection and self-discovery of a middle-aged white dude. As a future middle-aged white dude, I thought that was fun, I thought it was nice to read, and there were some really nice moments about the meaning of life, about self-reflection and self-identity, what it means to try to live a good life and to connect with people and everything wrapped up in that feeling. However, I read this and then immediately moved on to finish Babel. Babel is an extraordinary book that I'll be talking about very soon. It is a strongly anti-colonial book, anti-imperial book. It's a very significant book to read, especially if you're a white dude. The contrast between this book being a book about the white dude experience and Babel, I was like, this is trivial. It's such a privilege to have problems that are just these bizarre things that someone imagined, sort of as a reflection of their own life journey. That's such a privilege compared to all the horrible things that the characters experienced in Babel. I was like, I can't really go back to this and think, oh yeah, that was really significant. The themes are very hard-hitting, they're very important. It is nice. I don't intend to diminish this guy's experience. It's very good to read, and it's cool to hear about what he thinks about the world. But it is a lighter theme. It's really not super significant, and it's just more on a personal level. So this is not going to change the world. It's not going to educate you about anything significant. It's not going to galvanize you to do something about something wrong with our reality. Thematically, it's just nice to read and reflect on. That, unfortunately, is kind of canceled out to an extent, not fully, but a little bit, by the horror aspects of this book, in my opinion. I have read horror, I've read cosmic horror, I love cosmic horror. I thought this was going to be cosmic horror. There are some cosmic horror aspects to this, but it also does the brutal, realistic, actually terrifying horror thing pretty well. By pretty well, I mean I didn't like that because I don't like that in general, but it was, it shocked me. It affected me, so the author did a good job with it in some ways. I think the worst of the horror is at the very beginning, when you first realize, like, this is not a normal day for this guy. Like, the initial shock, I had to put this down, and it was like nighttime, right? And I didn't expect to be scared of this. I was like, oh, maybe it'll be thought-provoking and like a little eerie. I was terrified right away. I'm kind of squeamish with some things, and it was a horrible, horrible thing that happened right away. And so I was like, oh, dude, I couldn't sleep really well that night. I couldn't sleep really well for a couple nights after, because the horror aspects from that point on are just nightmarish. They're not like, some of them are pretty brutal. They're not necessarily as terrifying as something like, I don't know, I haven't seen The Conjuring because I refuse to. It seems too scary for me. Hereditary was something that was like brutal and scary and like just terrifying to me. They're not on that level. There's a couple moments that I think are sort of on that level, because it's just like, oh, like thinking about it makes my skin crawl. But the vast majority of it is just disquieting. Like, again, it's nightmarish. It feels like you're in some weird nightmare landscape. For most of it, some parts of it are like dreamlike. I guess like any dream/nightmare weird dreamscape thing you could experience. So yeah, the horror aspects, I didn't expect them to be as intense as they were in some parts. I didn't love that, but I was intrigued enough by the plot, I was intrigued enough by this guy's personal journey that I wanted to keep going. Also because there was a lot of humor. The humor kept me going more than anything else. I wanted a light story, I wanted something that was going to be chill, I wanted something on a more personal level because I was between books that were very significant. So I was happy to read about this guy's personal perspective, and the humor that was a part of it definitely drove that home more than anything else. He's not funny on the same level or in the same way that Vonnegut or Robbins are. He is funny in his own way, and it's very good. It's very silly. I enjoyed it. It didn't have me like rolling on the ground laughing. I've very rarely done that with books in my life. But the humorous aspects of this were definitely satisfyingly funny, and they balanced out the horror decently well. The characterization is light. It's really just about one person's journey. There's a little bit of growth for other people as well. Some interesting side characters, but he's pretty much just the main character. It's just about this dude, effectively. I keep insinuating that the author sort of wrote himself in as the main character. I think he effectively did. I don't know the guy, I don't know for sure. He could be telling a story that's entirely made up. This could be about a buddy, this could be about his dad. Like, I really don't know. I don't begrudge him that. I don't think that makes this better or worse. I just think that it's an exploration of self, and that's cool. After finishing this book, I've realized it belongs to an interesting little subgenre of like personal exploration stories, self-discovery stories that are low fantasy, kind of nightmarish, kind of zany, kind of weird, bizarre, just meditations on life and death and human connection and the self. Some other examples of that I read are Up Jumps the Devil. I thought that was pretty good. I think Jitterbug Perfume, bizarre book. I don't know if I recommend it or not, but definitely kind of in the same genre. Reincarnation Blues. Reincarnation Blues is actually one of my favorite books. I think it does the same thing as this, but better. I'll talk about that separately at some point. I've not thought about that for a long time. In that genre, that little subgenre, that niche is something I enjoy a lot. I think it's fun. When I want to read something fun and engaging, like I turn to those kind of books because it's nice to just be like, yeah, let me think about my place in the world for a little bit. Let me be self-indulgent and think about how nice it is that I have all these connections to people and how I foster these things, and just take a moment to look around and be like, life is great, because there's a lot to be grateful for. Out of all of the books I've read in that subgenre, this is my least favorite. That's not to say it's a bad book. That's not to say it's like not worth reading whatsoever. If something about it is interesting to you, I think it is worth reading. But if I were to recommend something to someone who is like, you know, give me a book about self-discovery, about life and its meaning that is a little funky, a little silly, a little bit fantasy, I would point them towards something like Reincarnation Blues. This one, if they also said they wanted some horror aspects, I'd be like, this is perfect for you. But I don't know if horror is entirely congruent with this weird, fun little subgenre. At least not for me. This is entirely personal. So someone else might say this is perfect for them. I think a lot of people might say this is great for them because it is that kind of journey with a bit more of an edge to it. But for me, it wasn't perfect. It was good enough for me to get through it and enjoy the process, but you know, I've just liked other books that are similar a little bit more. Actually, I think The Alchemist technically should go in this little weird group as well. It's a little bit more heavy on the philosophy and life lessons and religion aspects, and less heavy on the fantasy. But I do think it kind of takes my top spot for like that funny subgenre of like self-discovery, hero's journey, fantasy, low fantasy type stuff. I touched on the prose earlier. I do think it was one of the strong points if you enjoy a conversational and modern style of writing. If you're looking for flowery language, beautiful descriptions, like very highbrow prose, this is not for you. But I think the tone and the style of writing perfectly suited the plot and what was trying to be achieved in this book. To me, it felt like a fun conversation. It felt like a fun campfire story a lot of the time, and so I enjoyed the way it was written because it contributed to that feeling. So my final thoughts on The Hike by Drew Magary. I liked it. I'd give it 1 thumb up. For me, like 2 thumbs up is like, go read it. It's insane. It's so good. 1 thumb up is I enjoyed the experience. Middle is like, who knows, like whatever. 1 thumb down is like, I didn't really enjoy it. 2 thumbs down is like, bad. Avoid at all costs. This was good. I enjoyed it. It's super fun. I don't think I'll reread it, but if I wanted to read something that was like a little bit spooky, might get my blood like pumping a little bit self-reflective, a little bit funny, very weird, and I just want to read it like on the beach during the summer, I think this would be a pretty good pick. I'm not gonna say run out and go get this from your nearest bookstore immediately. It's not that kind of book. But if you want a silly little break from bigger, more impactful books, and more specifically you're cool with horror, this is a fun book to read. More than anything, I've not read something like this in a long time. I've been trying to focus on big sci-fi epics, epic fantasy, high fantasy, major, huge stories, as well as very significant books like Babel, ones that talk about important things happening in the world through a fictional story vehicle. To read something more personal is very fun. I think I'll do that more often between my big, like, massive books that are super long and the ones that also make me think a lot, that make me engage with the world differently on a daily basis. Because I can let a book like Babel sink in while I read something like this, because this is not super involved. So I do think that books like this definitely have a place in my reading moving forward. I think it's super fun, but it's not my main interest. It's not what I'm gonna prioritize in my reading. It's just a fun time. Have you read The Hike? What were your thoughts on it? Are you interested in reading it? Let me know. Thank you so much for being here, and happy reading.